My name is Gary Rutkowski, and today is May 5th, 2008, and today I'll be interviewing Fred Foy for the Archive of American Television in Studio City, California. Okay, we're going to start. First of all, Fred, thanks so much for doing this interview for us.
My pleasure.
And we're going to start right at the beginning. Can you tell me what was your full name at birth?
Frederick William Foy.
And where and when were you born?
Was born in Detroit, Michigan on March 27th, 1921, accompanied by my twin sister, Betty, bless her heart. My mom and dad were not expecting a double feature, and so I spent the first days of my life in a very comfortable dresser drawer.
That's pretty funny. So, can you tell me a little bit about your parents? First of all, what's your father's name?
Ferdinand, a real German name, Ferdinand Frederick Foy, and he worked at Cadillac Motor Company in Detroit. And my mother was the homemaker.
And what is her name?
Anna Foy, and she was just a wonderful mother and enjoyed her home and her family and the relatives who, in those days, were sort of concentrated together. Many of them lived down the block from us, and it was wonderful to be raised that way and have your relatives next door and to enjoy their company.
Was your family affected by the Depression in the?
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah, my father was out of work. My mother, to help support the family, did a lot of work for the teachers, cleaning their homes and doing that sort of work, just to be able to bring in $1 or two. And I remember it well. It was a very slow time, and we had little, but we had our health and we had each other, and that was important.
And what did you do to amuse yourself? What were your hobbies?
Well, I guess I began immediately once I found out there was a library where you could really get books and just take them out and read them and bring them back, which was wonderful. I just was an ardent reader. I mean, if I could go to the library and pick up a half a dozen books, my heart was great. Oh, this is wonderful. And I enjoyed reading all of the adventure stories, whatever it might be. And I think that sort of was the beginning of my love for acting and for because I would emulate the heroes that I read about in the novels. And actually, I lived in another world whenever I picked up a book, which was wonderful.
And do you remember the coming in of radio? Or did you have a set,
Oh, yes, I do. In fact, I remember at home in the very early days when you had the set with a little whisker thing where you would be able to bring in the local station or maybe the station in the next town. And then finally, I remember having that wonderful large Atwater Kent radio. And you sat in front of it and you just turned it on, and the bass was so great and the voices came through sharply, and then you could sit back and close your eyes and listen to these adventures and just put yourself right in the middle of them all. And it was wonderful. That was the beginning of radio for me.
And what were some of your favorites from those days?
Oh, Lord, I remember The Shadow, which was a favorite of mine. And of course, without ever realizing that someday I would be involved, I loved The Lone Ranger. I remember listening to the early episodes, and it was an exciting show, really wonderful, and I enjoyed that. And anything that had an adventure storyline to it, I would listen, and I enjoyed every minute of it. It was terrific.
And how many siblings did you have? Was it
just my sister, right? And we had a wonderful life together, and she wound up being an accountant and actually at WWJ radio in Detroit.
Oh, really?
And she had a wonderful career.
And Where did you go to high school?
Eastern High School in Detroit, Michigan.
And did you have an idea of what you wanted to do maybe when you graduated?
I really did. From my earliest years, I had a fascination with acting. And I remember getting into school plays and loving it. And later on, as I grew older, getting involved with a lot of the local groups of actors and presenting certain things. And I remember one of the favorites of mine during the Christmas season. They asked me at our church to if I would be the leading character in Scrooge. And I thought, wow, this is wonderful. I love this. So I did. I played the role of Scrooge and just was fascinated by it all. And that's where it all began. I had a wonderful love of the theater, and I really wanted to work as an actor. And as time went on and I graduated from high school, once again being very happy that in the final year at high school they inaugurated a drama unit, and the senior play was The Queen's Husband, and I was cast in the title role as the husband, and it was delightful. I got myself involved and got good reviews from everybody, and I remember actually the principal sent a note up and asked for me to be sent down to the principal. I thought, what is this about? But lo and behold, he sat down and he said, you were you came across so well in what you were doing on stage that I wanted to talk to you and find out what you plan to do. Are you going, do you want to go from here, from high school to a drama school somewhere? And well, I didn't have the real answer to that because I was a very shy person and very homebound. And so when he was suggesting my leaving home and going somewhere else and studying there, it didn't appeal to me at all at the time. And so I felt I'm going to remain here, and I'm going to go around and see if I can knock on doors or with the radio stations here and maybe do something right here in town to start learning something about the business. Well, I did. I made the rounds, but unfortunately, they were glad to talk with you, but without having any experience, And they said, we'd love to have you, but come back when you have maybe done a little more work. So, but good luck for me smiled again because at a little radio station there, a 250 watter, WMBC, not NBC, a couple they were the Rieblings, Al Riebling and his wife, had a little group of actors who would perform. They had the Old Opry House, which of course the villain and hero line of thing, the Old Opry House. They had a show called Time Turns Back, which was a march of time in reverse. And they would audition people, and if they felt you had any potential, they would, invite you to join the group. Well, I auditioned, and they did just that. And of course, I jumped at the chance to be able to be part of that. And it was no money involved, just you're going to work for experience. And I got started there while I was running elevators at Kern's Department Store in downtown Detroit. And I loved it. After about, I think it was maybe 6 months or more, a couple of the actors left the group and went on to, better positions. And they asked me, we'd like to have you play the lead in the Old Opry House, right? Play the hero. So that was great. I mean, now I was involved in actually playing a character. And then along came Time Turns Back, which had a lot of narration. And they said, Fred, would you like to do? I said, I'd love it if. So I was then doing the narration on the news show. And I was slowly polishing up my act, so to speak. And it was finally in the 1940s, just before the war ensued, that I auditioned and moved over to WXYZ, which which was the radio station in Detroit that had the only major drama shows, and that was, of course, The Lone Ranger, Sergeant Preston, and The Green Hornet. Excuse me. So I was happy to be there. The announcing booth, and I was on the announcing staff. The announcing booth was right down the hall from where these dramas were done, and I used to be able to see these actors and watch them and so on.
Now, when you were at NBC, did you was there a way to train for speaking on radio? Did you take?
Oh yes, yeah. What happened? I guess I skipped that. After the when the war years were coming up, these shows sort of died on that station anyway, and they asked me if I would like to do an announcing, be part of their announcing staff because someone had left, and I said sure, of course. So then I began to learn the rudiments of what an announcer would do, because you were on your own. You pulled your news off the wire, put your own news together. You put together record shows and announced them. So you were the one-man show, and it really was a learning area. You learned that, and you began to ad lib on mic. You began to use your mind more in doing the shows, and it was it was terrific. It was a real training area then for a few years. And then, lo and behold, what happened, of course, was the Pearl Harbor ensued, and I got called and auditioned for Uncle Sam and won that without a problem. So I, once again, luck followed me, because after I joined the Army, and they put me in a special service unit because of my background in broadcasting. And we were shipped out on, I remember, in Valentine's Day in February 1942. And went overseas with the unit, and we were infantry trained, and we were to join the Army in the desert campaign against Rommel. And when we arrived at Suez, and then were shipped to Camp Huckstep, which was right outside of Cairo, an army base there, the general at that time heard that this unit was coming in, and our unit also, outside of doing shows and maybe broadcasts or whatever, we had a complete sports crew who would set up baseball diamonds, football, and all this. And the general decided he wanted that unit there because it would be great for the soldiers in Camp Huckstep. So we remained there. We weren't shipped out. And lo and behold, a friend of mine wound up as one of the writers on Stars and Stripes, the Army newspaper. And he came to me one day and said, let me tell you this. He said, I think you'd be interested. He said, Major Vanda has set up a radio section here, and they're very interested they're looking for an announcer, and very interested because they want, on Egyptian State Broadcasting, it's completely staffed by Britishers and British broadcasters. And he said, the Army unit here really wants to get an American voice to balance the situation. He said, so if you do, he said, it's Major Vanda, his office is so-and-so, go over, knock on his door, and tell him who you are and what you've done. So I did that, and lo and behold, he said, well, listen, I haven't found anyone else here, and you sound like you know what you're doing, and he said, what you will do here, I'll introduce you to the people at Egyptian State Broadcasting, and he said, you will do news for them, probably evening news. He said they also do a newscast that's fed into the movie theaters at 11 o'clock, the late news. And he said, you'll be doing that, and whatever else they might like to have you do on the air. So that's how I started, right there in Cairo, Egypt. And it was wonderful working with the British. Made some very good friends who were broadcasters. And I finally wound up, they said, well, look, we like, can you do something, in the morning, maybe a record show of some kind? So I said, well, sure, let me put it together, and if you like it, fine. So I put out a half-hour top record show, which I called Up to Scratch, and went on, and it went into Cairo. The people in Cairo could hear it, and also at the camp. It didn't mean. And so, my God, I was getting fan letters all of a sudden from the local people, right? Would you play so-and-so part? We'd heard it the other, and it was wonderful, loved it. And
so was it the same as before, where you're producing the entire thing
right.
yourself?
Yep. You put the whole thing together, you picked out your records, what you wanted to play, and then you had your idea of how you would introduce them and so on. And it was great. So that went on for a while, and then things slowly changed over there as the war progressed, and finally they decided that they didn't really need the American voice on the air there anymore. So the radio station at Camp Huckstep, where we were based, the powers that be said, we'd like Fred to go back to the radio station. And we want him and Bob Mest, who was a very good friend of mine, want them to run the radio station and set up a good programming thing. So we were out there, and it was like doing your own little radio station and doing any programs. And we, of course, got all of the stateside shows on transcription. So we could schedule the regular, like the Jack Benny show, or you name it, we had them all. They'd ship direct to Armed Forces Radio overseas, and so we got and thought, well, why don't we do an evening show where they can call in and say, why don't you play so and so? I'd like to, and say happy birthday to so and so, whatever. So we were doing a night show of that type, and then we kicked it around. Also did a morning show. So we had people calling in, and we got a lot of action from the residents of the Cairo area, and so that's where I was until finally the big day came when the war was over, and I was then discharged, and that was back in 1945.
Now I wanted to ask you, you did a show with Jack Benny during these days?
Right. When I was over there, we also, all the USO shows would come through. And since I was the only, let's say, trained announcer, they would say, Fred, I want you to introduce Andre Kostelanetz and his wife. Nelson Eddy came over. So lo and behold, Jack Benny came over with Anna Lee and the harmonicist, oh God, I can't think of his name. Anyway, he came over with the show, but not with Don Wilson. So Major Vanda told him that, if you want Fred, he's certainly a seasoned announcer. And so in rehearsal, he said, the first rehearsal, he said, you just come over and you'll meet him there, and you'll rehearse whatever you do in the show. So I met him, and I was thrilled to death. You can imagine a corporal suddenly going to work with Jack Benny. So he was absolutely marvelous. He said, Fred, fine. I wish you had a different first name. Fred Allen, all right. And so I did the show, and it was just a thrill to work with him and do it. And I had a lot of lines with him, and they did record the show, and lo and behold, thank heaven, they said if you'd like a recording, and all of the recordings that they did then were on glass-based, and they packed everything up, and I said, look, send them back. If they don't arrive the way they should, fine, but at least I tried. Well, they did get through, and so great to have that show, which was done at that time. And Jack Benny and I did, as I mentioned, Andre Kostelanetz and his wife Lily Pons came over and did a concert, and I introduced them. And then lo and behold, one of my favorite singers, Nelson Eddy, arrived, and again, a very pleasant man, and introduced him on stage, and that was part of my job. So I was shined with luck.
So everywhere you were was always under Allied control. You never had to
right.
pick up and run or anything like
that?
No,
no, it was all right outside of Cairo, Egypt, and we never had any action there at all.
There was another show that I know that's important to you. It's called Christmas Overseas that you...
Oh, yes. We did a special Christmas show that was shipped back to the States. We did it from the Church of the Nativity in Jerusalem, and with a choir from the Army. And I wrote the script for it and narrated it, and it was just a beautiful, well-produced Christmas show. It had a lot of nostalgia, and we did that, and then they shipped it back to the States, and we got some wonderful reviews about it. It really was great, and that was another thing that was really a high moment for me to remember that I was responsible for doing that. And so actually, it just was as if someone was leading me, and to be able to do all of that and be in the Army, it was something special. I'm always deeply, deeply thankful for that I was able to continue my career, so to speak, and do it safely. Amazing.
Now, was your job being held for you at the Detroit XYZ?
When we returned, so I went back to the announcing staff at WXYZ, and very happy to be there because, again, the shows were still there, the Ranger, the Green Hornet, Sergeant Preston. And they would ask me occasionally to do second announcer on the commercials in the shows, and you do the second voice and whatever. And so I got to sort of rub shoulders with the actors on the shows, and then lo and behold, the day came when Harry Golder, who was the announcer on the Ranger, decided he wanted to go out to the coast right here and do, in other words, he wanted to do radio and radio news. And so he came out and got hooked up with the ABC affiliate here, and so it opened up the Lone Ranger for a new announcer narrator.
How did you find out that it was available?
Well, we heard I was at the station, so you got the news immediately, and then of course they posted a notice so that all the staff would be aware of it because they were going to audition all of the staff people at XYZ, and then they let it be known around the city, and for WJR, WWJ, any of the staff of there were invited to audition. So they auditioned and came over, and I did my audition as the others did, the same. In other words, they had you do an opening of the show and a lead-in and a Cheerios commercial and things like that. So this went on for a couple of weeks till they covered all the bases and listened to all the people. And you sat back and crossed your fingers and waited. And out of the blue, Chuck Livingston, who was the director, and I was in the announce booth, and he came in and said, "Fred, are you ready to go to work?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, Mr. Trendle heard it. Everybody who listened to all of the other people, but they thought that you would do the good job." And I said, "My God, are you serious?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You bet I'll be there." And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And of course you're excited, and you won this, but now, a week later, he said, "Your first show will be a week from Monday." And thought good, and I had an idea of the scripts, and I had an idea of the commercials and so on. But now you're coming up here for your first on-the-air network show. And sure, you won the audition, but man, you better be good because this is it, kid. So I remember going in the studio, and the actors couldn't have been better. I mean, Fred, my God, welcome. It's so good having you here. And I hear that you did a great job. And look, we're here, and if you need any steering, we'll be here to put you in the right place at the right time. So they really looked after me, said, now, when you do this, you're going to have to be at the mic and then back off because you're going to be, so they treated me terrifically. And so the first broadcast went down clean, very good. And that immediately now you can relax. So on the next show would be, this was Monday, the next show was Wednesday, and then Friday. So when I got on Wednesday and then Friday, suddenly you began to feel as if you were part of it. And then once you really got your teeth into it, and you were doing it on a weekly basis, 3 shows a week, you began to understand what the whole storyline was about, and you began to realize that you wanted to be an actor, and in essence, you were one of the actors, because when you got into this narrative, it was a special, you would be describing fights. You would be describing the fight between the Silver and the buffalo who was out to kill him, and the ranger saved him. And that is intense drama, and you're narrating all of this. You finally realize that you're acting, buddy, and just, get involved in it. And that's what happened over the years. You got yourself as, it was feeling like part of the show, because many of the shows had an awful lot of narrative in it, and wherever there was exciting scenes with either the Indians or a rustler affair or whatever. So I just was so happy to be with the show, and with a group of people that were marvelous actors. They were just terrific. They could play all the roles, any role. One week he'd be the sheriff, the next week he'd be the bad guy, And so it was wonderful.
Did you find that you had a different voice for Lone Ranger than you did when you were doing the news or something else?
Yes, you were more dramatic. That's about the way I'd express it, yeah. Because normally we're doing commercials, it's a blah, blah, blah. You don't get all that intenseness into your voice. And that was mainly it. That was the difference. So you became more of a dramatic announcer.
And can you talk a little bit about, just in general, finding your voice, even from the early years? Did you mimic announcers you had heard on radio, or were you told to do it a certain way?
I had announcers that I admired. Hugh Downs was one of my favorites, and he did the voice of Firestone on radio, and I used to emulate him in a way, his voice. Not on the air, because I never went on the air with anything that would be in his area. But yeah, I had my favorite announcers, and why, would follow their career and listen to them and gain some ideas from the way they address something. And as I said, the exciting part of it all was being involved with the actors, and then having, I remember this, Brace Beamer was the radio Lone Ranger, and he was a tall man, an outdoorsman. He rode. In fact, he had a ranch outside of Detroit where he trained horses, and he kept Silver and Scout. There was a Silver and Scout, and he kept them out at the ranch. He rode well, and they used to be more authentic with gunshots. They would go out to Brace's farm and take a sound crew with them, and they would record him firing off the rifle, gunshot, this, that, and the gunshots sounded natural because they came off, even though they were recorded, you'd get a little echo in them, and it was terrific. So they did all that to make the show as close to reality as they possibly could.
So he played the part even outside of, just as his own personality?
Oh yes, he loved the Ranger, and he did a lot of personal appearances during the years that he was with it. He would appear at Wyoming rodeo days or something of that nature. And one thing that he insisted on doing during his career was to visit children's hospitals. And he would go in the full regalia, the mask and all, and they would say, well, you know, this ward, we got a lot of youngsters here who do listen to the radio, and they're pretty sick little guys, but you know, they would love it if they could see their hero. And he would go in and sit down on the bed next to them, and you know, they would be in awe of him, and he would talk to them and say, you know, are you doing? And he loved doing it, and you know, it was part of his life, and very great. He was a fine man, and so the role was, you know, inspiring in a way. And I was, I remember the first broadcast when I was in the studio. He would work right across from me. He would stand at the mic, and I would be on this side. The mic was suspended from the ceiling. It came down, so it was hanging right here. He would work one side, and he would work the other. And I remember my first standing there, and here was the Lone Ranger right across from me. And it was just, you know, I thought, my God, I can't believe it. And because I do the lead in the opening, we were live. There was never anything recorded except for certain sounds that were on record and so on. But the opening, you know, would be the William Tell Overture, and then I would come in with the opening line, and he would resound with his Hi-O Silvers, and the opening would continue, and then we'd get into the first of the storylines. But it was exciting, really.
What was that standard opening?
The standard opening? Yeah. Well, you get the William Tell Overture leading in, and then he would say, Hi-O Silver! And then I would say, a fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-O Silver, the Lone Ranger. And he would off mic say, Hi-O Silver! Away! And that was exciting. And then as the years rolled by, we became very good friends. And he came in, well, I should preface that by saying that George Trendle, who was the owner of the property, and every script that was written went to his office, and he would read it before it was stamped okay, use it. He had to read, he had control of the whole thing, because he didn't want any scripts that would in somehow be a little, not in the right sound of the Ranger, you know. So anyway, I was asked to be the understudy of the Ranger. And I thought, wow, that's great, you know. And so then when Brace makes these trips to Wyoming or whatever, I'll probably do the show. It didn't happen that way. What happened was that when Brace, because we had rehearsal, of course, we'd come in at 3, and there was a read-through of the script, and there was a production rehearsal for an hour, putting all the sounds together and the music, bridges and the whole thing. And then you'd have a dress rehearsal. Well, when we came to the first read-through, and then I suddenly, he would be gone, but I would be reading his lines in the show, not on the air. And so that's about what I was doing.
During the dress rehearsal, you mean.
Right. I was in rehearsal for him. But then, lo and behold, the unexpected happened, and he came in late one afternoon with laryngitis. And he was talking like this. There was no way. So Chuck Livingston said, well, Fred, your night has arrived. I said, you kidding? No. He said, you're going to do the show tonight as the Ranger. I said, oh, my God. So the first thing, run to the phone, call home. I did that. You got to listen tonight. Don't miss this show. So now there I am, reading the script, going through it, and you know, a little, I think, oh boy, this had better be good. Went on the air, and everything went smoothly. Really worked well, and the actors after the show really made me feel great. And Brace himself came over to me and put his arm across my shoulder, and he said, "Fred, I'll never be ill again." I said, "Thanks, Brace."
Meaning that you were so good.
Right. So anyway, that was the high point of my Lone Ranger days. It was just great knowing that I could say that I played the part of the Ranger on radio one time.
Does that episode survive?
Oh yes, I have a copy of it. You bet it does.
How does it sound when you?
Great. I couldn't believe it. I said, "My God, that sounds good."
Can you tell me a little bit about the work week for Lone Ranger and also all your other duties, other shows?
Well, the Ranger, once I was on the Ranger, I was no longer on staff at WXYZ. So I was there every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the Ranger. That was it. So our call would be at 3 o'clock, and we'd come in and Chuck would hand out the scripts to the actors, and I'd get mine. And then we would do a first read-through in the studio, and he would get a rough timing of the episode in the booth. And then after that, we'd have a break, and then about a half hour later, we'd be back for the rehearsal, adding all of the sound effects, music bridges, so just the way the show would go. And that would take a while because he'd stop whenever there was anything that was a little tricky, make sure that everything, went smoothly. We'd do it over again, that section, whatever. And then when that was over, we had a break, and we'd come back after an hour. Yeah, we'd come back after an hour, and we would do the dress rehearsal, which was from top to bottom, exactly with the commercials, the whole bit, exactly as you would go on the air with it. And after that, we had maybe about 15 minutes or so in the studio before we hit the air with the show live. And we often would go with the same, the opening, everything, and then we'd go on the air, and the show would progress. And we never had any big hitches in the show, even though it was live. We never had things happen where there was dead air, in other words, where somebody stopped, because we were all so familiar with the idea that you're on the air and you're live. Once you start, you finish in the last minute. There's no way of stopping, right? Nothing, you're not being taped, so we never had any great mishaps. We had people would fluff it in the line or something, but nothing, not on the Ranger anyway.
Who else was on the cast? Who played Tonto, and who were the?
Well, Tonto was John Todd, who was an ex-Shakespearean actor and an Irishman, and he was excellent. I mean, his voice just fit the role, and he had it down pat for the Indian, and that was John Todd. And then, of course, the Ranger was Brace, and depended. Paul Hughes was one of the actors who did. Well, he was usually the gravelly voice who would do the bad guy, and then next week he'd be the sheriff. He played all, as they all did. They would mix their roles, but a great group of actors for radio, terrific, and Ernie Winstanley and Jim Fletcher were. The young actors. They were younger than Paul Hughes was an elderly, not creaking old, just a senior, period. But they were all very capable actors, and they'd take on any role that was assigned to them and come out sounding perfect. So it was great to work with them.
Why do you think the show was so popular? What was the appeal?
Well, I think the appeal was, we've talked about it a lot, but here you had the ingredients were the man who suddenly is caught in an ambush with his Texas Ranger friends and his brother, and all of the Rangers and his brother are massacred. And they also believe that he's dead because he fell with the others. Now here he is, and this lone Indian comes upon them in the evening and looks at all of them and checks and finds that one of them is still living. So he takes him to a cave close by and treats his wounds and really does everything he can to keep the man alive. And finally the scene arrives where the ranger...
Okay, you were setting up the Lone Ranger
Right.
story.
Well, at any rate, Tonto finally sees that he's coming to, and so the ranger says something in the order of, "Where am I? What day is this?" And Tonto says, "It's long time. You here for over a week more." Over a week? He said, what about my brother? What about... Ranger's all dead. Only you alive. He said, "My brother?" And he said, "Yes, your brother." And he said, "You look..." Ranger said, you sounded familiar. You look familiar to me." And Tonto says, "You remember? As a boy," he said, you helped me at bad time." And he said, "Yes, I do remember." He said, "You're Tonto." "Ah, me Tonto, and you Kimosabe. That mean faithful friend." He said, "Well, so all of my brother, all the Rangers?" "Yes." He said, "Well, they'll know I'm alive, and they'll be looking." He said, "No, me bury 5 Ranger, make 6 grave. They think you die too." So then the Ranger says, "All right." And he said, I will get all of them. He said, "That will be my quest, to find these outlaws and bring them to justice." And Tonto says, "Well, me help?" "Yes, Tonto, you can help." He said, "Well, but they'll know me if they see me." He said, "Somehow," he said, "I've got to hide my identity in some way." And he said, maybe Kimosabe, you wear a mask." "A mask? Yeah, that could be it." He said, "My brother's vest." So they make the black mask out of his brother's vest, and he wears the mask. And he says, "Tonto, I'm going to hide my identity, but I'm going to trail and find Butch Cavendish and his killing brood." And Tonto says, me ride with you, Kimosabe." "Fine, Tonto." And Tonto says, "You know then that you, all Ranger killed, you Lone Ranger." "Yes, I'll be the Lone Ranger." And that's where the first episode ends. And then, of course, we go into the episodes where he finds Silver. And there's wild horses, groups of wild horses all around. And he sees this one beautiful white stallion as part of this group. And he feels that's the type of horse I would need. He's strong and whatever. And the episode goes on, and a day or two go by, and then he sees they see the herd again, and then he notices that there's a buffalo coming down, and Silver steps out of the group of stallions, and faces the buffalo, and then there's this mighty fight between the buffalo and the horse. And the Lone Ranger sees that as it goes on and on, the horse is weakening because he's being cut badly. So the ranger finally, before anything else can happen, he uses his rifle and kills the buffalo, and then walks over to the white horse, who now senses what has happened and realizes that this man has saved his life. And so there's a little rapport between them, and he doesn't approach the horse. He finally just walks away, and he said, "We'll see what happens." And he said, "That horse will be around here," and so it happens. He stays in the same area. So one day the ranger finally carefully walks up to Silver, who is not named as yet, and talks to the horse, and finally allows him to pat him, and they get quite familiar, and he says, he talks to him, and then he walks back to Tonto and says, "I have to have that horse. That he's a magnificent stallion. He has all the strength that we need to ride together." And Tonto says, "Well, what you do?" And he said, "Well, tomorrow I'm going to try to see if I can put a saddle on him." So it occurs, and he moves on, and yes, the next day he's able to get close enough, and he is able to saddle the horse, and then he puts the bridle on him, and the horse accepts it. And so he says, "Then you're a beauty, you're a real beauty, you're Silver," and that's how the name comes about. And so he gets on the horse, and they become a unit. Off they go across the prairie. The horse doesn't attempt to throw him, and that's when he finds Silver, and they become a pair. And Silver is in many of the storylines where he plays a big part in them in some way, saving the ranger by being sent off and then returning in time to save him from a certain situation. And that was how Silver became part of the show. And so you had these, elements. You had the man who suffered the loss of his friends and his brother, then went out to search for and find the men who had killed them, and he and his brother, who was killed, had been partners in a silver mine. So that's where finally they decided that the silver bullet would be an identifying object, and to the Indian there was something about the silver bullet that made it something in Indian lore, and made it sort of a spiritual thing, and so the silver bullet was entered, and now you have the silver bullet. Wow, that's something to think about too. And each one of these added to the mystique of the character, and the most wonderful part of it all was that he was not a killer. In other words, the Lone Ranger would never kill anyone. He would save people's lives if he could, and he would wound anyone who pulled the gun, but never kill them. In other words, put them in jail afterwards, but that was it. He was not, the typical killing sheriff or whatever. And that mystique really put them all together, and you had something you looked forward to listen to the next time, and you never knew what would happen, And then they had a lot of episodes where the Lone Ranger was in real trouble, and we, like a serial, they might do it in 2 or 3 episodes where is he going to get out? Will he? and they kept that up, and the show just, as it slowly went on, it built on itself, and never, as we did the show, did we realize that it would become a legend. And I guess I was the most surprised when the show finally went off as a radio show and the television show arrived. And so I finally left Detroit and went into New York because I wanted to try to do something with the networks if I could. And when I auditioned for people and so on, I got a surprise because they would say, "That voice, I can play, I can't place it, but I know where in the world?" I said, "Well, did you ever listen to the Lone?" "Oh my God, yes, you would." I'd say, and I never thought that it went beyond Detroit, But anyway.
Now, how important was the mask when Brace Bremer would do like public appearances and things like that?
Oh yeah, he would wear the mask, yeah, and never reveal his identity. The only time he ever revealed his identity, one time, and that's when Butch Cavendish finally was in prison. Then he escaped from prison and went off to try to kill the Ranger. And that episode, when they finally get together, of course, the Ranger succeeds in the fight with Cavendish. They're on the ground right at the edge of a cliff, and Cavendish is on top of him and starting to strangle him, and the Ranger finally gets his legs up and pushes them up and grabs his shoulders, and then up his legs come and he throws him right over his shoulder and off the cliff. And that's where Cavendish winds up dead. That's the end of Cavendish. And Tonto finally comes up on the scene, and he has been down there, and he says, I look and I see Cavendish dead. And what was I going? I was leading up to something.
That he was revealed his real.
Oh, right. So the Ranger goes down, and this is before that. I was ahead of myself. Tonto has not come up yet. The Ranger goes down to look at Cavendish, and Cavendish is still gasping with a little bit of air. So the Ranger kneels down next to him and says, "Cavendish, I finally succeeded in finding you after you killed all my friends and my brother. And now I'm going to let you see who you're dealing with." And he takes off the mask. It's the only person that ever saw him without it. And Cavendish says, "You, my God, you," and then he dies. So that no one will ever know his identity still. But that's the only time, and very clever, I thought, to do it that way.
Did they repeat that for the TV show?
That I don't know. I don't know. But that was a good episode, and it showed that he did reveal his identity, but only to someone who he knew would not be able to do anything with it.
I want to ask you a little bit more about George Trendle. What was he like running? He was running the station, right?
Right. He was in charge. Yes. He owned the property of the Lone Ranger. He owned all three: the Preston and
Green Hornet.
Green Hornet. Yeah. And the thing is, you never saw much of Mr. Trendle. I mean, he never came down to the studio to even congratulate anybody or anything. You never saw him. He had offices upstairs. And the only times you would really see him is once in a while you'd run into him when he was walking down the hall. And that was it. You'd say, "Mr. Trendle, how you doing?" "Fine, okay." And that was it. He never had, he worked behind the scenes, but you knew he was around, because if anything really went wrong, he would go through the ceiling. But we never had a relationship with him in any way. So I can't tell you a thing about him except that he was the leader of the band there.
Now, when the TV show was coming around for the Lone Ranger, was the radio show still on at the time?
It was on. The TV show went on just before we finally. Our show, radio, went off because Trendle wanted to transfer his money into television, and General Mills wanted to do the same thing. They wanted immediately that the Ranger be as soon as possible on the air, and so it came on just before we finally went off as a live radio show. Then on radio, then they did run a lot of the old episodes that had been recorded, and it went on for on the network for maybe close to another year, and that was it. And it ran syndicated.
And for the television show, did you re-record the opening?
Yes, yeah. In other words, we were in Detroit, and they were out there here where we are now. And when they wanted any changes, we did the opening, but not the way we did it on radio. They cut it down. They wanted shorter opening, so it opened with just the fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a Harley Hi-Yo Silver, the Lone Ranger. And that's all we did of the opening. And that came on with him galloping in on the white horse, and a great opening, very good. And then if there was anything needed, I didn't do any narration on the show. And if there was anything needed, changing copy of the Cheerios commercials, we would do it in the studio in Detroit, and it would be sent out there, and then they'd put it on the track. So I never had a chance to work with him, but then I finally had a chance to meet him at one time, and what a wonderful man, and delightful to know.
Clayton Moore, you mean?
Right. He felt about the Ranger exactly as Brace did. He said, I was so thrilled. So when I knew that they wanted me to do this part, he said, I just was absolutely, I couldn't say enough how wonderful it was to be selected as the Lone Ranger. And so he followed the same routine. He would just never do anything to slight the character in any way, and that was great. And the way I met him is kind of interesting. It was at, let's see, let me think about it. A few years back, they had a gathering at Lone Pine, California, celebrating some year of the Ranger. I can't remember which one, but anyway, my wife and I arrived in the little town, and we said, well, let's walk around, see a little bit of the town. We were out there walking around, and someone came across in the street and said, hey, you know who's in the store over there? I said, no, who? The Lone Ranger. I said, you know? He said, yes, he's in there. I said, let's walk across the street. So we walked over, and I opened the door and walked in, and there, right ahead of me, with his back toward me, is Clayton Moore in the outfit, right? So I walked up behind him, right behind him, and said, a fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a Harley Hi-Yo Silver. And he turned around and with me said, the Lone Ranger. I said, Fred Foy, Clayton, I've been waiting for this moment. He said, oh, Fred, my Lord, I've listened to you, I've heard you, but it's so great to meet you. And that's how we met. and he was a delight, and he rode well, and he was perfect for the role.
Okay, we're at the end of